so we're going to start out with Bob today in this session called The Bench of Dreams. And we're going to be hearing from Bob and Jean, and they're going to share some additional resources with us as well. They have presented at every single turn that we've had, and this is the fourth one. And they've created a session just for Turn Week to kind of hold a space for some really particular and special and very important parts of our wisdom and parts of our knowledge and facets of being that come from their long experience working with the United Nations and also in all of their many educational and ministerial endeavors. So, Bob, if you'd like to start out, I would love to hear about what you've been thinking about lately and what you would like to share with audiences at Turn.
Well, it's great being here with Turn again. It's been a wonderful experience, and I personally have learned much in putting together the presentations and listening to other people's comments. And as Kristen mentioned, we're here to explore possibilities and to ask more questions in a way that maybe answers aren't that important as much as the questions are. That's always been a guiding principle for me when one is encountering a particular situation. The title is The Bench of Dreams, and it dawned on me that when we talk about dreaming, I hope it doesn't mean this presentation will put us to sleep. Yeah. But rather dream while we are awake rather than dream while we're sleeping. But anyhow, what I would like to present, I'd like to open up some doors as well to further questioning on the connection with the environment. And something that's always has puzzled me is the relationship between activism of any sort, in our case with the climate crisis, and interiority. Okay, we hear a lot about what people are doing, what has to be done, the different programs that are initiated, how we can save the tropical forests and save life in the oceans, and what do we do about methane gases released because of ice cap melting, all the different issues. One, I know for myself, one can be overwhelmed, can be paralyzed, and ask oneself, well, what do we do? What can I do? Because the problem is so overwhelming. And so I would like to, just spend some time exploring, not necessarily to give answers, but to open up a conversation between what is it that propels us to act? What's going on inside our heads and our hearts that motivate us to choose this action rather than another action? And I hope this doesn't sound too heady. I'll try to draw as many examples as I can, concrete examples. But I really do think that there's something there that I would like to explore, and perhaps you have questions and you have ideas yourselves that you could share in this exploration. But it comes down to the question, how do we engage the environment? And the inner self, okay? What goes on within one's heart as we confront these enormous ecological issues. How do we understand our own inner self? Do we understand the landscape, okay, that goes on within oneself? And along with that landscape, they're shaped by feelings, and often feelings act like the glaciers over land that carve out the land and create the hills and the lakes. I come from Michigan, and Michigan was created by the glaciers, the Great Lakes, and the hills, the flatland. And so there are contours there. And many times feelings have the weight of a glacier over a landscape. I'm interested in looking at what is the bridge then between the outer external environments and the inner environment of the self. And again, that landscape, of feelings contribute to how we understand relationships. And ultimately, which the title of our presentation is Yearning for Friendships in Our Common Home. So friendship is going to be a major theme because that emerges out of what we feel and how we desire intimacy and intimacy with one another, intimacy with nature. And that intimacy influences how we understand the global environment. I mentioned earlier that I'm in Eastern Kentucky right now, and listening to the labor statement and the indigenous statement, I'm thinking to myself, the same can be applied here to Appalachia. Appalachia is an unknown part of America. It's a forgotten part, and it's coal country. And much of our energy comes from strip mining. And the people struggle for their rights, for a healthy life, have been blunted many times because of the businesses that are here. I've had the opportunity over the past week to talk to a lot of people. And what strikes me is the people's hope, their enthusiasm, their energy to make change. And so I'm mindful of the people here on the soil that I'm at, of all the struggle, the bloodshed that has taken place as well, and continues to do so in this forgotten part of America. The turn workshop that we have this week occurs in the middle of the pandemic, as the other two previous turn projects last year. And the pandemic, as we know, has affected everyone around the world. And we are more conscious, for better or worse, that we are a global village. We are linked together in visible and invisible ways. So the title of Bench of Dreams, Transforming Our Feelings, Yearning for Friendships in Our Common Home, might be a mouthful. There are many different things there, but they are linked together. And we look at where we are and where we hope to be. This is the part of the dream. We dare to dream. We dare to open ourselves to the intimacy and the mystery of the other, who is holy ground. And that's a major theme that Jean and I will bring up through here, is how we view the inner landscape and the outer landscape, the natural landscape. Really depends on how do we view the other, as holy ground or as ground to be stampled upon. We dare to hope that friendship evolves as the basis for society, for nation building, and for relating with all forms of life. It could even point us towards looking at a new way of approaching God as a friend. And so we ask the question, who is the other? Who is the other? In Fratelli Tutti, the sequel to Laudato Si, Pope Francis uses the model, the story of the Good Samaritan, as a model for building a new world. The other is the one who was beaten up by robbers and thieves and is laying on the ground. Is bypassed by professionals, religious and secular. We could ask ourselves, who is the one beaten on the ground? Are they rocks, plants, trees, rivers? If we look at the natural environment as the other, perhaps we could have a conversation with that other, a conversation with the rocks, the plants, the trees, and the rivers. But in order to do that, one must not treat them as objects, but as a thou, because only one can only enter a conversation with the other who is a subject, a thou, a one with whom one can enter into an intimacy. As I was preparing for this presentation, I was reading a book that was given to me to read. I was given 2 major books to read in 3 days. Well, obviously, I can't do that. But this one is called Mud Creek Medicine, The Life of Eula Hall and the Fight for Appalachia. And as I opened the book, you know how they have a poem or something, a quote in the beginning of the book. There's a quote here by Larry Gibson from what's called The Keeper of the Mountains. And this gives one a sense of the spirit of the people here in the mountains. And I think it lends itself very well to what we're talking about here this afternoon. And it's our relationship, our engagement with the natural environment. As a thou, it begins, we have a conversation with the land here. The land will talk to us. It will tell us things. For instance, like nothing comes easy to people in the mountains. We are a little worn, we are a little bent, we are a little broken, but we are real, and we are here. This is life for us. We ain't got a choice here in the coal fields. We are fighting back, 'cause it's the only thing we have. There's a lot here to reflect on. But it says we have a conversation with the land. And I've sensed that since I've been here, that there is an intimacy with the natural environment that I don't find in Detroit, Lexington, Chicago, or New York. There's something different here. The land defines the people, and the people define the land. There's a respect, and there's a conversation. I would like to highlight that notion of the conversation with everything in the natural environment. That can only happen if one does not treat the natural environment as an object, because when we view the environment as objects, that means it is open to control, manipulation, and destruction. We can have a conversation with the mountains and the rivers. It would be an oversight to begin this presentation without making a reference to the pandemic. And I'd like to make the pandemic a context. And we could ask ourselves, what message and teaching can we get from a tiny virus when we are in conversation with that virus? The pandemic is a test of relationships. It's a window of clarity that is only for a moment and then it closes. The pandemic has taught us that our economics and politics are fractured. They're broken. The facade is removed and we see ourselves as we are, as some degree of selfishness, others who are selfless. The pandemic has also highlighted the positive actions of people, of many good people, risking their lives, such as the first responders, medics, healthcare personnel, police, chaplains, and many others. The German theologian Karl Rahner claims that grace is everywhere, but we don't recognize it. I was in the Bronx at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, and as many people who have gone through it can identify for themselves, the people, the many good people, people of grace who have risked their lives to save others. Why don't we recognize the grace around us is the question I pose. Is it because there are certain feelings like fear, blunting our ability to recognize the grace? If so, how do we transform these negative feelings into a new kind of vision of seeing everything, from the tiniest speck of dust to the cashier at the grocery store, as gift and as an invitation into deeper intimacy? Richard Rohr writes, what I let God see and accept in me also becomes what I can then see and accept in myself, in my friends, and in everything else. This is radical grace. Grace is everywhere, so we want to believe. The pandemic has given us a window of clarity on many levels, especially the level of feelings, and it is open only for a moment. Our lifestyle and the global economic systems are not sustainable, according to the voice of this tiny virus. It is challenging us to reflect on how we are living in the world and with one another. The coronavirus knows no national boundaries, and it indicates something has gone awry. Something is wrong with our relationships with the planet. We are not friendly with the environment, with the rocks, the oceans, the forests, and animals. And for that reason, we find ourselves at a choice point. Every crisis is a moment of opportunity for growth, but it is also for backsliding into what is called the so-called normal, the status quo, and the way things used to be. And I see this in many people in positions of authority, regardless it's the church or a business, government. We hear this constantly. When are we going to get back to normal? When are we going to get back to a situation in which we can have control over our lives? And my question is, before we get back to a so-called normal, have we listened to the message, to the voice, to a tiny virus? Have we engaged the conversation? Have we learned anything from the pandemic? Our choices going into the interior landscape, the interior environment of oneself, trying to decide what to do. Our choices will determine the future we want to see. Those choices deal with how we view the other person as fundamental. Do we relate to the other as an enemy, as a we versus them, or as a potential friend that recognizes that we are all in this together? Does the other have inherent worth just by being a human being? Or is the other a mere consumer of market forces? Is one's worth a matter of being or of having? These same questions also concern the environment. Again, with the rocks, the plants, and animals, do they have value in themselves as rocks, plants, and animals? Or are they mere objects subjected to market forces and then disposed of in an irresponsible way that endanger the survival of future generations and of the earth? Choices have consequences in the short and long term. Okay. Yeah, and the being and the having, what I'm working up towards is how we view ourselves as human beings and our relationship with the planet is often conditioned by the economic models that we're living out of. And the current neoliberal model that we have treats people as objects. And if we're going to recover any sense of a human response to the crisis, we have to ask ourselves, are we treating animals, plants, the oceans as an object, as we treat other people as objects, or as entities in which we can enter into a conversation? Okay. And it's more or less, what would be called a contemplative attitude, contemplative in a sense of um, there's a difference when a river can teach me something. And that can only happen when I don't treat it as an object. When I can move myself out of the context, an economic model that demands that I treat everything as an object for profit rather than as a gift in itself because it is what it is. Maybe it's more of a like an existentialist approach with a dab of love on it and compassion in order to engage into this conversation. Because what Gene and I have talked and with Kristen is um, our engagement with the environment. I'm kind of stepping back right now and trying to just simply respond and add a further commentary on what Mark was saying. Is as we engage in the defense of the environment, uh, do we fall into the capitalist trap of treating the environment as an object? Okay. We could say we want to save it, but is it to save it for a profit that I may not be aware of that goes on deep within one's psyche? Uh, all I'm trying to do, what we're trying to do is flash a light on this relationship between interiority, what goes on within ourselves, and the extension and relationship with um, the exterior environment. How do we become friends with rocks? If I want to take it to, take it to an extreme, do I bother and to get to know the rocks, for instance? Um, During a pandemic, I made a promise to myself that I'm going to study birds, okay? Because the pandemic was so darn depressing, okay? Living in the Bronx, we had the highest fatality rate there in the first several months of the pandemic. Um, and Odile was there also, I think, um, and so I needed something to uh, find hope in life. And so I wanted to turn to something beautiful. And that was birds. And so I got involved in birds, studying about birds, learning the photography on birds and things like that. I tried to, steep myself into that. And as I've come out here to Eastern Kentucky these past few days on this mountaintop in the middle of nowhere with a few spotty places of internet, I go outside and there's a symphony of bird song that I've never heard before, that I would not have recognized if I had not spent time learning about bird calls of different species and all that sort of thing. Okay. I see that for myself as an engagement of trying to respect bird life as it is in itself, rather than as, well, can I grab that bird, that wild canary, and put it in a cage? You know, and give it 3 squares of birdseed a day. Okay, so that's where I am going with this. And this ties in with the whole notion of the bench of dreams. Why did we choose the bench of dreams? And some years ago, the Thomas Merton Center at Bellarmine College hosted a conference on spirituality and political engagement. Um, the UN Secretary General assistant at that time, Robert Mueller, attended the conference. And he visited Merton's Hermitage and sat on a bench. And knowing about Merton's writings, and he said, "This bench is the bench of dreams." And he took a plaque out and he says, "I want to put a plaque right here on the bench and identify this as the bench of dreams from which Merton dreamt of a different kind of world." As a monk and social critic, he examined the issues of his day: the civil rights movement, racism, the Vietnam War, nuclear threats, and dialogue with other faith traditions and meditations on indigenous communities. It was Merton who explored the inner life as he critiqued these issues of his day. Here we have a hermit in the middle of the woods making pronouncements that have impacted people in authority and governments. It was from his interiority and struggle with the theme that is found outside the entrance into the Kentucky monastery south of Louisville, Gethsemane. It says, "God alone." Merton made penetrating insights through his writings that impacted these leaders. God alone is an invitation to meet God as friend. And if humans are the image of God, then friendship is the basis for respecting one another, regardless of race, religion, or whatever difference there may be. Mueller, on the other hand, had his dreams as well. As a survivor of World War II and a major architect of many of the UN programs, Mueller dedicated his life to promoting peace in a very explicit way. He remained at the UN for over 40 years. He had a dream idea for every day. By the end of his life, he had over 7,000 dream ideas on how to better the world. One might ask, who is this moral voice at the UN? Who is it that can guide us through, navigate through these difficult waters of today? And I was at a conference of economists and religious leaders. And when that question was posed by one of the religious leaders, there was an economist who said, well, obviously, the moral voice at the UN is Pope Francis. With the publication of Laudato Si, read in its entirety yesterday, gave global energy to the United Nations design of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it paved the way for the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. Last year, another encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, is an extension of Laudato Si with an emphasis on friendship. Then after that, last year, another document was published by Francis called Let Us Dream, the Path to a Better Future. So it seems like friendship, the themes of friendship, dreaming, engagement for a better world are dominant themes that are in the atmosphere right now that we are invited to take hold of. Mindful of the coronavirus, Francis claims we must now move from liberté and égalité to fraternité, from liberty, equality to friendship. Friendship is the new horizon and the basis for a new humanism, a new relation with the environment, and a new future that we all want to see. So on this path towards a different world, when the UN was created, FDR left a handwritten speech in a drawer when he died. He was supposed to give a speech in San Francisco in 1945 on the creation of the UN and the promotion of the UN Charter. And he was supposed to deliver this, but never happened because God called him to the heavenly kingdom. The UN Charter, the purpose of the UN, basically was to prevent World War III. And what he wrote was this: if civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all peoples, of all kinds, to live together and work together in the same world at peace. The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Here again, the relationship to the outer world, to the external environment, for creating peace, major obstacle that can blunt that program are feelings, the feelings of doubt, of hopelessness, of futility. And he's calling attention to that, and I think it's pertinent for today. As the writing of the UN Charter developed, there came the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as principles of relating to one another. It is interesting to note India offered the principle of non-discrimination. The United States and United Kingdom advocated political and civil liberties. The USSR stressed social and economic rights. China, Greece, and Latin America stressed the rights that entailed duties and responsibilities. At that time, Eleanor Roosevelt said, "This Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men and women everywhere." Today, we have a similar Magna Carta, one might call it, the Sustainable Development Goals as an action plan. And I think at this point, I will leave it to Jean and Kristen to pick up on this theme, to develop a little bit more the SDGs. You see the chart behind Jean in the background, and she's going to talk about the beauties of the colors there, as well as some specific goals. So let me turn that over to Kristen.
Great. So I actually have a video of a conversation between Jean and myself where she shared her major points about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the connection to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with a special focus on number 5. So I'm going to ask you to look at Jean's beautiful background there and find number 5, and you'll see it in a larger way in just a moment. So here we go. I'll also be stopping this periodically to show you a video, so there'll be moments. All right, so welcome, Jean. It's so good to see you. And folks, this is Jean Ponder Soto, and she and Bob Duecki are the great team that brings so many incredible topics forward in the world, in their work. Some new ways of thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and really right relations. And today's talk for Turn 4 has Jean sharing a lot about gender equality in the context of human rights and the environment and how those things are related, and really looking at the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is that we need to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So if you'd like to begin telling us about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals overall, Jean, just for people to have a quick summary of that, that would be great.
Oh, thank you so much, Kristen. And it's a great delight and it's an honor to be here to talk about these most important topics. And behind me, my screen shows the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And you see number 5, if I can get it right, it's right over here, which is gender equality. The Sustainable Development Goals were decided upon in 2015 by all of the member nations that belong to the United Nations. And basically what these nations were saying is, we want a better world. And what is the pathway to a better world? And you might think of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and for short we call them the SDGs, as steps or areas that need to be addressed if we're going to have the kind of future that we want for our children, our grandchildren, and all of creation. So they're also called the 2030 goals, because that would then be the area of time. By 2030, it was hoped, by the year 2030, it was hoped that these goals would be met. And as Kristen has mentioned, the one that I'm particularly interested in now is Sustainable Development Goal number 5. And the way the UN phrases it, if you were to Google that, is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So this is the goal that they're looking for. This is the process that they want. And this is very much connected with the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the Declaration of Human Rights would spell out what women's equality would look like. What would it be if women were equal? Well, it would mean that these universal human rights were being achieved by women. So what we have to remember, even though it kind of sounds, kind of silly even, is that women's rights are human rights. They're not just meant for another sex. Women also are included in these rights. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes things like economic rights, rights to health, rights to free speech, rights to an education and to be able to choose what your profession is going to be, to not be bound by strict gender roles. It means equality under the law. It means freedom from being tortured. It means the freedom to be able to speak your mind about political situations freely. It also means the right to be able to be at the table when these important political and economic decisions are being made in any community. And you will find in the chat a wonderful reference to the 30 basic human rights. And it would be good to know that, because it's about us. It's about what we can expect. Now, in SDG 5, if you were to Google it and click on 5, you would be able to reference what some of the target goals are. In other words, these are the building blocks, these are the steps, and they even give indicators of when these steps are being made. And I'd like to share with you what some of these target goals are. For instance, eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. Undertake reforms to give women and girls the right to economic resources and participation. Enhance the use of enabling technologies and ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership in their communities and in their particular areas. And when these targets, I should say, are being met, that is then when women and girls are progressing toward full rights. Where are women's rights now? Especially in the context of the pandemic. And the chief of the United Nations gives us a wonderful short review that was made very recently on where these human rights are now. And you'll be able to see this on the video.
Yeah,
Yes, I'd like to share just the name of the two videos that you've referenced so far for our audience just looking at this. Just share my screen for just a moment. Right. Okay, here we go. And so if anyone wants to Google these two videos separately, one is called A Brief History of Women's Rights, and this will come up from the United Nations. And another one is called Where Are Women's Rights Now as Related to the Pandemic and Environment.
Women and girls are leaders, change makers, caretakers, and peacekeepers. But while they have an empowered role in our societies, to this day, women and girls are still forced to fight for their rights. How much progress have we achieved, and how much work remains? How can you carry on the fight for equal rights? Women's struggle for equal rights is centuries old. But 1848 marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention, where women activists publicly petitioned for their civil, social, political, and religious rights. In 1893, New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. Entering the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality, just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. In 1945, the United Nations is formed in response to the destructive toll of two world wars, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underline the place of women's rights within. This sets a foundation for women's rights norms and standards at the international level. In the subsequent decades, just as women are taking historic leadership positions in government, women activists at the grassroots level dovetail with the worldwide momentum by becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. This momentum reaches a climax in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action presents a visionary global agenda for women and girls' rights. But in spite of all the progress, as we enter the 21st century, patriarchal stigmas persist and exemplary leaders arise to resist them. With the rise of the digital age, social media emerges as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. A single woman's voice is now louder than ever. Grassroots activists trigger social movements online and offline, from cities to villages, inspiring future generations of women and girl leaders. After relentless campaigning, these movements generate changes in policy that signal a true shift in international attitudes and practice towards equal rights. Where are we now? A quarter century after the Beijing Declaration, women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. The ink isn't dry. Be a part of Generation Equality, and let us continue to write history together.
The COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced two fundamental truths about human rights. First, human rights violations harm us all. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on vulnerable groups, including frontline workers, people with disabilities, older people, women and girls, and minorities. It has thrived because poverty, inequality, discrimination, the destruction of our natural environment, and other human rights failures have created enormous fragilities in our societies. At the same time, the pandemic is undermining human rights by providing a pretext for heavy-handed security responses and repressive measures that curtail civic space and media freedom. The second truth highlighted by the pandemic is that human rights are universal and protect us all. An effective response to the pandemic must be based on solidarity and cooperation. Divisive approaches, authoritarianism, and nationalism make no sense against a global threat. People and their rights must be front and center of response and recovery. We need universal rights-based frameworks like health coverage for all to beat this pandemic and protect us for the future. My call to action for human rights spells out the central role of human rights in crisis response, gender equality, public participation, climate justice, and sustainable development. On Human Rights Day and every day, let's resolve to act collectively, with human rights front and center, to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and build a better future for all.
If I were to summarize what we were sharing with everyone today, the concern of addressing the environmental concerns, the conversation at the level of friendship that we need to have, and everyone has a concern about the environment. The one thing that I would like to suggest as a takeaway is that nothing is going to change unless there is a critique of the present dominant economic model. We need to question unfettered capitalism. That might invite a discussion on, well, what is healthy capitalism? But that might be for another time and someone else can take that up. But unfettered capitalism is defined as the drive for maximization of profit. In other words, everything's for sale. The jungles, the atmosphere, the oceans, the rivers, and humans, okay? Everyone is up for sale and subjected to market forces. There is a total disregard for the common good and for the commons. That is how I define, in a very quick way, unfettered capitalism. Unfettered capitalism is killing this planet and killing us. It is the elephant in the living room. And it must be addressed and critiqued. It is a way of coming back to identifying ourselves. Are we citizens or consumers? The Secretary General talked about human rights, and he talked about sustainability, solidarity, and cooperation. That is not within unfettered capitalism. It is a part of the Sustainable Development Goals that Jean addressed. The Sustainable Development Goals present an alternative model to unfettered capitalism. The basis of that is to view the other and that which is in the environment as an other. I'd like to conclude with a saying from the last paragraph of the essay from C.S. Lewis, The Weight of Glory, that has an impact here. It says, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. It is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses." And so we ask ourselves, who is our neighbor? The person next to us, the mountains, the rivers, the animals. It is the conviction on this basis of reimagination of the human, and it serves as a critique of the current economic model that reduces the human person to an object for consumption rather than for reverence. And so in a way, when we talk about the bench of dreams, it is a holy bench dreaming about holy people, holy animals, holy mountains, holy rivers, holy ground. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon.